Hey, what's going on, everyone? Bass here. So the Packers' second preseason game is just one day away against the New Orleans Saints after two combined days of joint practices versus the Saints this week. So in this video, I want to go over the three main things to watch for in this game. Now, the assumption is that none of these starters will be playing in this preseason game. Just like last week, a huge group of veterans did not play in the game, and I would assume the same case for this game as well. I think if we are to see some starters, it'll be next week just for a few drives, if that at all. Now, last week before the San Francisco game, I said the three things to watch for was Jordan Love, the young wide receivers, and the depth at safety and edge. And I feel like last week we did learn a decent bit about all three of those things, so I will not include any of those in this video. Now, that doesn't mean they're not important. Obviously, I'm very interested to see how Jordan Love does respond for this next game against the Saints after throwing 3 interceptions in the last game. But with that in mind, let's move into the three most important things to watch for in this upcoming preseason game against the Saints. For number one, I have the offensive line play. Last week, the offensive line struggled quite a bit, mainly during the run. They were actually pretty good in pass protection. They only allowed 1 sack, and that was to Danny Etling. And overall, I thought the pass protection was good. Hanson, Runyon, Myers, Ryan, and Cole Van Landen all had an 80-plus pass block grade. But the run blocking, on the other hand, was a bit rough. Only Hanson and Runyon had a grade above 70, and that's kind of been an issue all of camp. The Packers haven't been able to really run much. The linemen haven't been making many lanes for the running backs that often, and the running backs haven't had much luck running against the Packers defensive line in camp, and then also the Saints defensive line the 2 days of joint practice this week. Now, last week versus the San Francisco 49ers, the Packers averaged 4.1 yards per carry, which doesn't look as bad if you just straight up look at it from the box score, but it also includes Dexter Williams, who had a carry of 25 yards and averaged 9.7 yards per carry because of it. So there's definitely an outlier there, and yet they still only averaged 4.1 yards per carry with that. Tyler Goodson, 3.1 yards per carry, BJ Baylor, 2.7, and Patrick Taylor, 3.3. All very low averages. I did like what I saw from Tyler Goodson, but that 3.1 yards per carry is definitely not a good stat to have. And a lot of times in that game, it wasn't the running back's fault. They were getting blown up in the backfield. They had nowhere to go. There was no true running lane. So at that point, it's really not their fault. It is on the offensive line, and that's why it's going to be very important for these young guys to step up and start producing on that offensive line and creating holes and creating lanes for these running backs. Mainly, the combination of Newman and Hanson has not really meshed well in the run game. Although Hanson did have a pretty solid game, this was not the case for Royce Newman. With Elgton Jenkins near return, I feel the experiment of Royce Newman at right tackle should probably end, and he'll probably still get snaps at right tackle this preseason game. They'll likely go straight into that game with the same unit with Hanson at right guard and Newman at right tackle, but I would like to see him get more right guard snaps, as that's where he'll end up if he does end up starting, because if Elgton Jenkins comes back, I think he's right tackle number 1. They've been practicing him there all week. That's where I think he goes. So it seems like there'll be an open competition of sorts at right guard right about now. Could be Newman, could be Hanson, Sean Ryan, even Zach Tom. All 4 of those guys I feel like have a chance to become the starting right guard at some point in the season, whether that be week 1, middle of the season, or towards the end. I think all of these guys do have a good chance at that. So watching all of these linemen battle for that one spot will definitely be interesting, but also all the other linemen on the offensive line. Yosh Nijman at left tackle, Caleb Jones filling at left tackle has had a good camp so far. He could definitely make the roster. Josh Myers has been having a good camp, so has John Runyon. Then, of course, there's still Cole Van Landen and a couple other guys. So there's a lot of young depth on this offensive line, so it's going to take a couple of these guys to step up, and those guys are going to make the roster. For number 2 on this list, I have the tight end depth. And as we saw last week, the Packers did decide to waive tight end Dominique Daphne. Now, he did go unclaimed, so he did indeed revert back to the Packers IR, but nonetheless, he will not be on the 53 to start the year. Mercedes Lewis, Robert Tonyan, if he's ready to go week 1, and Josiah DeGuara, in my opinion, are the roster locks at tight end. All 3 of these guys are going to make the 53-man roster. But that 4th or even 5th spot, depending on how many tight ends the Packers end up keeping, has a huge question mark right now. At the beginning of camp, that 4th tight end spot was definitely Tyler Davis's to lose, and he had a really rough first preseason game, and then a bad week of practice this last week on top of that. Multiple false starts, just really not a good week of practice and not a good preseason game. The Packers also signed tight end Nate Becker this week, adding him into the mix. So very interested to see what he has in this preseason game. He's a 6'5", 258-pound tight end. end. And then, of course, the other tight ends include Sal Cannella and Elise Mack. So at the end of the day, you essentially have 4 guys fighting for one tight end spot if the Packers end up carrying 4 tight ends and not 5, which I think that will be the case. And all 4 of these tight ends will get plenty of snaps tomorrow, so I think it'll give us a better grasp of who that 4th guy might be. With Mercedes Lewis and Robert Tonyan not playing tomorrow, Josiah DeGuara will likely get the start tomorrow, so of course I'm excited to see him more as well. This is kind of a make or break year for Josiah DeGuara. I've liked what I saw so far in camp, so I'm excited to see more of him this year in that H-back role. But overall, I think that 4th tight end spot as of right now is completely wide open. So lastly on this list at number 3, I have the young defensive line and more importantly, Devonte Wyatt. Last week, we didn't get to see any of Devonte Wyatt. He was inactive after suffering a concussion a few days prior to the game, and he had cleared concussion protocol up until the game, but the Packers kept him out as a precaution. Now, I agree with that. You don't want to rush back head injuries, especially for a preseason game. But the other guys on the defensive line in this last game against the 49ers, I thought played super, super well. The defensive line has been really good this entire training camp and preseason. The 49ers averaged even less yards per carry than the Packers at 3.5 yards per carry. And the best performance, in my opinion, on the entire defensive line was definitely TJ Slayton. Had an 86.7 pass rush grade and a 36.4% pass rush win rate. But I don't want to leave out any credit to the other guys because Jack Heflin and Chris Slayton also had really good games against the 49ers. The depth guys overall had a great game. I feel like the defensive line has been so good as of late. And that's because this defensive line is just loaded with talent this year. This is the most depth and talent I think the Packers have had on their defensive line in a very long time. Kenny Clark, Dean Lowry, and Jerron Reed didn't even play in this game, yet all 3 have been very dominant in training camp, especially Jerron Reed, who the Packers signed as a veteran signing this offseason, might end up being another great veteran signing by Brian Gutekunst, which would just be awesome. But the Packers are likely to keep 5 or 6 defensive linemen, and the current locks, there's 5 of them. There's Dean Lowry, Kenny Clark, Jerron Reed, Devonte Wyatt, and TJ Slayton. I see those 5 guys as 100% making the roster. And that leaves one spot if they decide to keep 6 defensive linemen, which they very well could. So a fight between Jack Heflin, Chris Slayton, and John Ford for one spot. And I didn't include Akil Byers because he has been hurt as of late, so I just don't really see him fighting for that spot. And these 3 guys have been good in training camp and preseason so far. Heflin, Chris Slayton, and John Ford, so having these guys battle it out will be very interesting. But overall, I am most excited to see Devonte Wyatt finally in an actual game. Albeit it is just a preseason game, but nonetheless, he's been good in camp every time the pads come on, so I want to see him in an actual game against another team's offensive lineman doing what he does best with the pads on. He's been a bit overshadowed by Jerron Reed because Jerron Reed has just been an absolute monster this training camp, so obviously he's been getting snaps over him, and Jerron Reed likely will start the year in the first team at defensive line, and Devonte Wyatt won't, but that doesn't mean Devonte Wyatt won't get plenty of snaps this year and be beneficial to this defensive line as a whole. But overall, there are many things to still watch for other than these 3 things that I didn't mention today. As I said, I'm still very interested to see how Jordan Love responds after the game last week. Obviously, I want to see more of these young wide receivers. Can Romeo Doubs put up another touchdown? Danny Davis has been hurt all week. We likely won't see him. Will Juwan Winfrey continue his hot streak? Is Samori Toure, will he play good? So obviously, there's a ton of things to watch for and be excited about. But in my opinion, these 3 things are the most important. But I want to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. What are you specifically watching for in this game? Did I not mention it in this? If there is, just leave that down in the comments below. And of course, if you want more Packers news analysis and updates, I upload almost every single day with everything Packers. So if that does interest you, please consider going down, clicking the subscribe button, as well as turning on post notifications to not miss any of the videos. But that about does it for this one. I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching, and as always, go Pack Go.